Welcome, electronic video guests, to the world's greatest movies, Volume 1. Today we're going to be looking at two classic movies from opposite ends of the cinema spectrum. We will begin with the 1961 classic of the French New Wave, Last Year at Marienbad. I first saw this unbelievably on television maybe 40 years ago on old WGPR Channel 62 in Detroit. This was way back before 62 was a CBS affiliate. This was back when Channel 62 was the first black-owned station in America. Back when 62 was a amateurish independent station with a minuscule viewing audience, weak signal, primitive production standards, and terrible programming. Terrible programming except for their late night movies. There was a period back in the day, maybe for a year or 2 years, when Channel 62 would show European movies in the middle of the night. They must have found a package of old Euro flicks at some bargain bin distributor's fire sale. They had maybe 30 foreign movies they would run over and over again. They were awful, grainy prints with faint subtitles. And I don't think anyone at 62 ever screened any of these movies because they were shown uncut, nude scenes and all. There must have been only a handful of other night owls besides me watching these movies, as there was never any public outcry from family groups about 62 showing skin. It was an odd set of films. Most of them were sexcapades or erotic thrillers, starring the likes of Laura Antonelli, seemed like Wife Mistress was on every other night, and Isabelle Adjani. I saw One Deadly Summer so many times with Adjani's psycho nympho burned into my mind. I could never take her seriously later in her career as a serious actress. But mixed in with these lightweights were a few such classics like Ecstasy, The Rules of the Game, Contempt, and the incomparable Last Year at Marienbad. Now, watching the creepy, trippy, gothic Last Year at Marienbad was a genuinely surreal experience, as it was interrupted every 10 or 15 minutes on Channel 62 for a Mel Farr Superstar or Harry the Hatter ad. You might remember Mel Farr, the old running back from the Detroit Lions. Well, he'd have these commercials for his used car dealership smack dab in the middle of all these European art films. He would appear in the commercials with a superhero cape, flying in to deliver the best deals on used Fords. So you can see there he's got his cape on. Anyway, the juxtaposition of the height of European culture and the tacky depth of American commercialism was mind-boggling, to say the least. Now, I just got Marienbad on DVD to watch it again for the first time in decades. Now, it is even better than I remembered. I'd forgotten how cleverly and with meticulous detail and stunning design the filmmakers explored the illusions of reality and memory and the mysteries of experience. David Lynch, of whom I'm a great fan and who also deals in these things, could, however, learn a lesson on the value of self-discipline from Marienbad's director Alain Resnais and screenwriter Alain Robbe-Grillet. Resnais and Robbe-Grillet were able to present ideas as esoteric as Lynch's, but without Lynch's rambling excess. Marienbad is a masterpiece of control. The story is as ambiguous as any of Lynch's, but it never becomes self-indulgent. With Lynch, I always have the feeling the fellow is not telling everything he knows. Doesn't matter whether this is because he isn't telling everything or because the story is imperfectly told. But Renee and Rob Grier tell the viewer everything, and last year at Marienbad, they tell us every possible thing, so that Marienbad is the most user art-friendly film ever made. Now, Marienbad is constructed around a familiar plot, the love triangle, in the film between the characters X, A, and M. X meets A at a grand chateau resort and pesters her to the point of stalking as he harangues her with memories of their alleged affair from the previous year, also perhaps at Marienbad, and her promise that she would meet him exactly 1 year later at their present location, whereupon she would leave her husband and run off with X. But X has one small problem. A claims to have no memory of ever meeting him. Now, the ingenious Rob Grier script unfolds, then refolds, then unfolds again, as X repeats over and over and over again the details of the alleged affair, in a sometimes pathetic, sometimes pleading, sometimes cruel and suave, sometimes whining, sometimes desperate attempt to convince A of its reality. The repetitions, however, gradually incorporate variations, at first trivial, but then becoming increasingly unsettling and sinister. By the end, the viewer is overloaded with interpretations, all equally valid. Perhaps X made the whole story up. Perhaps X and A did have an affair, but A chooses to deny it in order to remain with her husband. Perhaps X stalked and assaulted A, and A is suffering from a traumatic disorder. Perhaps X stalked and assaulted A and invented the affair from last year as part of an alibi. Perhaps X and A had an affair which M discovered, and M killed A, and now a year later X is just wandering around the insanely ornate chateau in his own fantasy world, etc., etc., etc. The interpretations are limitless. Now, in determining the film's visual style, director Renee showed his costume designer stills from 1920s silent films to use as a model. Now, this style is also suggested by the manner in which the characters who populate the hotel are presented, mostly presented in artificial poses as if frozen in time, rather than behaving naturalistically. Now, one of the most famous images in the film is this one right here. The two characters rush out of the chateau and are faced with a scene of figures in this geometric garden. Now, you notice the people cast long, dramatic shadows. Those shadows were actually painted on the ground. And the trees in the garden, see those trees, they cast no shadows, and the trees are actually artificial. The contemporary moviegoer, raised on a diet of mindless action films and juvenile sex comedies, would likely ask of this film, what's the point? And that would be the point, exactly. Director Renee and screenwriter Rob Grier require the viewer to use his, her, their brain to think and to participate instead of sitting back and becoming desensitized to bludgeoning violence or reverting to infantilism from adolescent humor. Marienbad received a mixed response upon its release nearly 50 years ago. If it were to be released today in our Cineplex temples of Century Assault, the response would be unanimous. The drones in the theaters would greet it as the Sex Pistols were greeted in the Deep South on their U.S. tour, with angry howls and beverage showers. Marienbad is an eerie, disconcerting film, aided by an almost silent film-era horror score, heavy with funereal organ music. Giorgio Albertazzi plays X, and he seems the most normal of the characters. He drives the plot with his narration of the alleged affair. He seems like a fellow trapped in a recurring dream, trying to reason with the phantasms from his subconscious. French actress Delphine Seyrig plays A. No, actually, she really poses as A. With her defensive body language and corpse-like makeup, she seems like the personification of PTSD. Let me get a picture of the other main actor. Let me see if I can find that. There's this other guy. Yes, here. The weird, almost ghoulish-looking Sasha Pitev plays the sinister M, who has an almost supernatural ability at a card game, which figures prominently in the movie. Marienbad is replete with symbolic triangles, and perhaps the most revelatory are the card game scenes, in which 16 cards are laid out in a triangle shape. Now, I thought Marienbad might seem a little dated, but no, it remains a timeless masterpiece. In its geometric staging, unnatural lighting effects, and the highly mannered cast performances, Last Year at Marienbad has the appearance of an artificial world inhabited by creatures struggling with their illusions of determinism. In the end, one may view Marienbad as an exaggerated picture of our own attempt to understand human experience. Now, our next world's greatest movie is from a far, far different place on the cinematic spectrum. Though both films were made in the early 1960s, Last Year at Marienbad is definitely high European art, while The Strangler is pure American pulp, a grimy B-movie straight from the American gutter. Now, straight from the sleazy opening lurid shot, you see here, this is the opening shot of the movie. You see the reflection in the Strangler's eye of a nurse undressing right from this sleazy, lurid opening, which is immediately followed by some ripe degeneracy as the Strangler strangles the nurse, then compares the nurse's corpse to a child's doll. He then takes the doll home, strips the doll naked, and then indulges in some grotesquely sweaty, naughty business. Well, this crazy opening promises a great sicko classic to follow, but unfortunately the remainder of the film is a fairly routine early serial killer flick. In fact, it was quickly shot in 1964 to cash in on the real-life Boston Strangler hysteria. The Strangler is saved, however, from becoming a complete yawn fest by Victor Buono's performance as the troubled protagonist. And this Victor right here again. Let's show this. That's Victor right here. Now, Buono, if remembered by anybody for anything, it says King Tut in the Can't Be Batman TV series, is a grossly obese, prissy, egotistical hospital lab geek with a doll fetish and a smothering, nagging, bitter, sickly mother, badly played by Ellen Corby, who will go on to her most notable role as the humorless grandmother in The Waltons. The Strangler's psychological profile could be sketched as proto-Edmund Kemper, and Buono plays it with a fair degree of creeper skill, mixing in periods of morbid ecstasy with a childlike innocence. The fat man is most happy and at ease when playing games at an amusement park arcade. Now, the rest of the cast's acting skill is best described as low-grade wooden, with the notable exception of Diane Sayer, who has a dirty bedsheet sparkle as the bad girl co-worker of the Strangler's wholesome arcade girl crush. Besides Buono and Sayer, the film's other saving grace is that all the Strangler's victims, for some reason, strip down to their bra and panties just before meeting their maker. Now, an interesting thing about this picture here of Diane Sayer, and if you remember this actress at all, you probably don't remember her name, but if you ever watched Leave It to Beaver, she was the red hottie that Wally had a crush on in one episode. But she turned out to be way too fast for the straight-edge Cleaver boy. Well, anyway, Miss Sayer has been dead for almost 20 years now. If she were alive today, she'd be in her 80s. But here she is in this photo, and in this moderately successful motion picture, in the full bloom of her youth. So full of the life force as you watch the motion pictures 56 years later, and as you are stirred, her carcass is rotting 6 feet under. And there's something just so, so quantum about it. The bittersweet entanglement of the past and the present. Sadly, cruelly, Miss Sayer died of breast cancer. Anyway, I guess that's kind of a bummer to include in a movie review, but The Strangler, not the worst movie ever made. In fact, better than most of the garbage that Hollywood sets on our curb today. It's an eternal celluloid flame burning in the memory of Diane Sayer, Victor Buono, and all the other extinguished stars of past movies. Well, that is it. I hope you enjoyed The World's Greatest Movies Volume 1. Even if you didn't, as an act of charity, please consider hitting the like button and the subscribe button. Now, we'll be back in a day or two, but until then, remember, head over to Amazon.com. Put in the author's name right there. You see that? That's your narrator. Put that name in there and any of these book titles into the search bar there at Amazon. One of these books will pop up. If you're interested in making sense of human experience, if you like to consider all the possibilities, like in Last Year at Marienbad, if you just want to get down into the grime of the gutter like the Strangler does, you just might like these books. These books are for people who scrape by, paycheck to paycheck people, thrown into this crazy world without a clue, tossed into it from the blackness of the cosmic void, herded from birth into a so-called way of life that says it's all about going to school till you're 18 or 22 years old to get a good job so you can buy a nice house and lots of other stuff you don't really need, but distracts you from enlarging your worldview. You live like a robot, just like your bosses want you to, just like the people you earn a lot of money for. But from time to time you malfunctioned, you did some things you shouldn't have done or weren't proud of, or things happened to you and you felt hopeless and bitter. One lucky day, that behind all that reached out from behind the that and opened your eyes, you realized you've been sold a bill of goods. But now what do? How do you go about living an authentic life? Well, if you're interested in that type of thing, you might like one of these books. But if you're easily offended or just want to pretend the world's ways are the right way and things will get better, you're a crybaby, this book ain't for you. But if you're a big boy or a big girl or a big tranny, head over to Amazon, check out one of these books. I think you just might like them. All right, that is it. Volume 1 of the world's greatest movies. Like I said, we'll be back in a day or two with something else. Until then, remember, enjoy the rest of your life.